Hi, my name is Rene, and today I'm going to share with you the tool I use whenever someone can't lose weight because the person keeps cheating on his or her diet. If you're often unhappy, tired, and frustrated, and you can't stick to your eating goals, this episode is for you. Most of my clients come to me because they want to lose weight, and most of them even know what they need to avoid, but they can't. I often hear that they eat clean during the day, but then in the evening, that's when it happens. Ice cream, chocolate, cookies, chips, crackers, pizza, you name it. The problem? Oftentimes people are frustrated, unhappy, and burned out. Then those foods give them pleasure. If one is unhappy overall, then also taking away that pleasure leaves you with nothing to look forward to. That's why it's so hard. What's the solution? Let me first explain the crucial difference between happiness and pleasure. They're actually not two words for the same thing, but the exact opposite of each other. Pleasure is short-lived, while happiness is long-lived. Pleasure can be achieved with substances. Happiness cannot be achieved with substances. Extremes of pleasure lead to addiction, while you can't be addicted to happiness. Pleasure is dopamine, happiness is serotonin. So what allows us to become strong enough to withdraw from a pleasure-inducing substance? We have to rebuild happiness. In order to know what makes us happy, we need to know who we are, how we were meant to do things. How to find out who we are? How to make things that make us happy? Luckily, there's a tool available for all of us. It's called the Kolbe Index. I recommend this test to all of my stubborn cases. I asked David Kolbe, CEO of Kolbe Corp, to come on this show and explain what the Kolbe Index is all about. You will find out why I think every practitioner and therapist should use Kolbe in their practice. By the way, I'm in no way affiliated with Kolbe and I don't get paid to do this episode. I'm just a big fan because I've seen over and over what the Kolbe Index can do for you. Here we go. So thank you for joining me today, David. And I am famous for telling everyone who wants to hear it that I only regret two things in my life. Number one, not having read the book or something like Money Master the Game by Tony Robbins. And second, not having done my Kolbe A index at 16. Both would have saved me a lot of sorrow, despair, and frustration. So thank you for everything you do with Kolbe.
Oh, you're welcome. I really love to hear that, especially because really we exist because we have a mission. We want to help as many people as possible, but you in your case, we want to help people understand a part about themselves that's great, that can really make a difference in their lives. That's kind of what we're all about. So I love hearing it when you tell me that it has made a difference.
Can you give us a brief overview of the three parts of the mind and why it is so revealing to learn more about the cognitive part?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll just mention that what we do at Kolbe Corp is focus on the cognitive part of the mind, but I'm going to leave that to the end because That's the part that we're going to talk most about, but it's also the part that people don't know. So I think it's better to start with the two parts of the mind that we're all more familiar with because we've been told about them. We've learned about them essentially our entire lives. So maybe the most obvious one is the part called the cognitive part. It's about how smart you are, what you've learned, kind of the mental skills that you master. So if you are a good math student, that's part of who you are cognitively. And you go to school for the most part to work on that cognitive part of your mind. And then as you grow up and you become a professional, you have a career, you learn more cognitive stuff so to advance that. And it's also little things, just with your smartphone, when you get a new app, the cognitive part of you learns how to use that app. So that's the cognitive. It's very broad, and yet we also all know about it, without even thinking twice. It's just, oh yeah, I get that. And since one of the things Kolbe does is we have an assessment, I'll also mention assessments as we go. So cognitive assessments, everything from your third grade spelling quiz up to a more long format, almost clinical IQ test. College entrance exams. So here in the States, the SAT, a baccalaureate exam, if it's you're doing that in Europe, all kinds of cognitive tests. And as professionals, we get those from time to time too. So I'm an attorney. I had to pass the bar exam. That's just a specialized cognitive instrument to see if I know what I'm supposed to know to be a lawyer. So that's the cognitive side. The second part is what we call the affective. It's sometimes people call it personality. I think that's a little problematic because, well, that's a very broad term. But really what that's talking about is your motivations, your fears, your interests, your desires. So, and we've learned about that too when our parents teach us to be generous or to share our toys. That's an affective part of us. Maybe some people don't have that value. They hold more of their stuff closely and they don't share it with others. Values is a key part of that affective side of us. So we learn a lot of those things too. Some of them maybe you can always debate with all three parts of the mind, how much are we hardwired for it and how much do we learn or evolve over time with these? Clearly on the affective side, there's some evolution in who we are. You're not the same person in terms of generosity at 5 and then at 15 and then at 35. You change over that. And it's not necessarily just because of your stage of life. There are all kinds of other things. So yeah, your values, your preferences, what you like, that's really part of that affective part. In terms of assessments, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of affective assessments. Some of the better known, the Myers-Briggs or MBTI, that was one of the ones that got things started. Predictive Index, Profiles International, Strengths Finder, so lots of them. Some of them are really valid and solid. I think the ones I mentioned are some of the better ones. They're certainly some of the best known ones, but it really goes all the way to really just kind of fun, fluffy throwaway stuff that you can take on the internet or, a Cosmo quiz. What kind of car would you be? That's just fun. And nobody's pretending that that's rooted in science or valid. You just do it because it's interesting. And then there are also clinical tests. The MMPI is one of the more clinical tests that looks at kind of maybe even abnormalities or problems that people might have. Lots of tests. Great. So those are two parts of the mind, but we haven't even talked about the Kolbe one, the conative. Conative is the way you do things. It's the way you take action. By the way, this idea of three parts of the mind, we didn't create it. It literally goes back to Plato. And many thinkers throughout the intervening 2,000 plus years have talked about this three part of the mind concept. So this third part that most people have never heard the word conative or conation before.
I haven't, to be honest.
Yeah. Most people, it was actually in a book of, it was like the 500 most obscure words in the English language, and it was one of them. I can never decide as a business person, is that a marketing opportunity or a huge marketing burden? I still don't know. Um, but the point is, it's not our made up invention of this third part of the mind. But what we've done at Kolbe is we've helped people understand it. We've helped understand that there's this instinctive, we think you are born with it and it doesn't change over time from the evidence that we have. That's what we've seen. And it drives the way you do things, the way you take action. It's different than what you are smart about. It's different than what you would like. So for instance, you might really want to be, and this is me, I'll admit, I would kind of like to be a more organized person. I'm just not. In a short little burst, I can force myself, and we can talk about some of that stuff later. But just as an example, I would like to be organized because I've been taught that it's important and other people value it. So I think I should, but that's not my forte.
And I'm the opposite. Whenever I run into a situation where it's not organized, it drives me crazy. It's what I do first. Would you agree when I say the cognitive part could also be described as the instinct? It's just within us and it just comes out whenever we don't have the time to think.
Definitely, and it's a specific kind of instinct. It's the instinct that you have for striving, for doing things, for getting things done. So, for instance, other people in other contexts, you might talk about somebody's maternal instinct. Oh, I see this little baby and I can't help myself. I'm drawn to it. That's also instinctive. So we're not covering every possible kind of instinct, but it's specifically the ones when you're striving, when you're problem solving, as you were describing it. You're not thinking about something. You just jump in and take action and do it. That's when you see the cognitive piece of who you are most clearly. Because keep in mind, all three parts of the mind work together. You typically don't separate them out, at least not consciously. So using my example of organizing, because I want sometimes to be organized and systematic, I might do that, especially I'm also reasonably smart, so I can understand, hey, there are times when that is just the kind of smart thing to do. I should put a process in place because it's going to help me and somebody else. Isn't my first natural reaction, but all three parts of the mind work together, and the smart side of me realizes this is important, make it a priority, and I do it.
Could you explain the 4 action modes and why knowing these modes can be and how they can be used to improve the everyday life?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we start with the cognitive part of the mind, but then we've broken that down because we've identified that there are really 4 what we call action modes that kind of define those instincts for everybody, for you, for me, for everybody in the world. And we've worked in I don't even know how many different countries. Right now we have certified consultants in 21, so we've worked with lots of different cultures. We see it's universal. So those 4 action modes, I'll start with fact finder. So fact finder is the way we all deal with information, how we gather and share information. So, and all of these, I think it's best to understand them kind of as a spectrum. We all fall somewhere on that spectrum in each of these 4 action modes. It's not a better or worse. So unlike an IQ test or almost all cognitive tests, on all those, you want to get higher. You want to, because that's better. Smarter equals better. I mean, that's how most of us think. There's no better when it comes to Kolbe. So in Fact Finder, I happen to be on the end of the spectrum where I'm all about getting lots of detail, delving into something, becoming an expert, finding facts, doing research. I mentioned I'm a lawyer. That comes in handy certainly in law school, and then in many, if not most, areas of actually practicing law. But if you think about law school, it's all about researching what some judge 200 years ago thought about this, and what did somebody 6 months ago think about it, and how can you apply a certain set of facts. So that's one end of the spectrum. That works for me. The other end of the spectrum is somebody who really focuses on the big picture. They don't get overwhelmed in detail and minutia, but they look at, to use the phrase, they see the forest rather than the trees. We can describe either of these things in positive or negative terms. So if you wanted to describe my strength as a negative, you could say, David, you can't you can't stop researching. You don't know when to quit. Which is kind of true, but why describe it as a negative? Because that's also what drives my success. Same thing with that other end of the spectrum, what we would call a counteract fact finder, because those people counteract this drive toward always getting information in detail. So that's fact finder. By the way, in that mid range, so I talked about both ends of the spectrum because it's often easiest to understand the action mode by the extremes. But in that mid range, where frankly most people fall, are people who accommodate both of those extremes. Yeah, I'll do some research, but it's not the first thing I'm going to do. I'll usually look and see, what has somebody else already done? That'll be enough for me. So most people are in that mid-range. The next one's what we call follow-through, and follow-through is how we deal with systems and structure and organization. So on one end of the spectrum, somebody who initiates in follow-through, they need to create systems. They need to organize things. Not just use ones that are there, systems and structures, not just use the ones that are there, but actually create them. So you would actually see times where initiating follow-throughs who go into a position in a company that's already structured and organized, the smart thing to do might just be to work within those existing ones. They're going to change them anyway because that's what they do. They create that stuff. So you'll see these people being very organized. Things are tied together. You can sometimes see it in the way they dress because everything will match in the sense that it goes together. It's an integrated whole. It isn't necessarily all the same color, but there's a reason for the flow and the everything fitting. The other end of the spectrum is somebody who's very adaptable, very open-ended, not necessarily flexible because that's often an affective trait. Somebody who's easygoing, and even though it's not their thing, they're willing to try it. That's different. I'm talking about somebody where, think of it in the sense of a structure. Yes, they've started this process and there's 3 steps in, but if there's a roadblock or something's not working, frankly, their first instinct is to go away from the flow that has already been created and to find a shortcut, to ignore the written out process and just do something that they think is going to work. That's kind of the other end of the spectrum. Again, both of them positives. You just need to find, if you think professionally, you need to find the right niche so that your strength fits what you're trying to do. The third one is quick start. Quick start is how we deal with risk and uncertainty. So I'll start at the other end of the spectrum, the what we call counteract or preventive side. In quick start, that's somebody who really has a strength for keeping things stable, preventing chaos from happening, finding what has worked and sticking with it. Sometimes people hear this as a negative, like, they're unwilling to try new things. It's not a matter of that. It's a matter of they really hold on to what works. They don't needlessly try stuff out. So it is a positive. Again, find the niche, find where it fits the best. The other end of the spectrum is somebody who really does need to try things different. They experiment. They seek out unknowns rather than seek to know everything or stick with what is already known. I see this a lot in entrepreneurs, like kind of the classic entrepreneur who just does something totally different, where the family is like, what the heck? We never even knew you had an interest in that. And all of a sudden you started a business. And then in between, again, somebody who kind of mitigates those two extremes. By the way, those middle strengths, they're harder to see in people a lot of times, but they're really important in the real world because we all work with people at various points on this spectrum. And those people who have that strength in the middle are able to sometimes translate those extremes to help people work together better, deal with varying situations a little more effortlessly, a little more naturally. So as I said, I explain the 4 modes by the extremes, but I want to emphasize how important that middle strength is too. Then finally, the fourth of the four is what we call implementer. If I could change the name, I would, but we've been using it for a long time. It's not how you implement, as in carry things out. It is about three-dimensional space, the way we deal with the physical world. So the name comes from using tools and implements. So on one end of the spectrum is somebody who needs to build, physically build, construct, put together. When I say these people are hands-on, I mean it in a very literal way. They will grab onto what they can and construct and physically demonstrate. The other end of the spectrum are people who more imagine. They don't need to build and construct in the three-dimensional world, but they can see it on a computer screen, kind of one step removed from reality, or they will envision it rather than construct it. Again, we need all kinds of those strengths. In the modern office world, you do not see as many initiating implementers because we kind of weed a lot of those people out. Frankly, they weed themselves out because they would go crazy sitting at a desk for 8 hours a day, just being able to look out a window. They need to be outside. And too many office environments don't allow that.
I would like to ask you something. Like for me, when I went against my grain, against those instincts, it ended with me being frustrated and burned out.
Yep.
Is that also like your finding, or what's
Yes.
usually the case when people just completely go against themselves?
Yeah, we see it all the time. And frankly, the people who are more driven suffer from it the most because they can get in a situation where, again, there's this whole complicated mishmash of what we want, what we're smart about. So it's easy to find yourself in a position where, wow, I value this. It's maybe it's a high status job, for example. Or if you're still in school, you have an opportunity to go to a high status school. So how could you turn that down? How could you turn down that promotion and more money? And when I say the more driven people suffer from it more, they have a higher tolerance and a greater drive for putting up with the frustrating parts for longer. Because conation is not about what you can or can't do. So there are some things that you can do, you might be actually quite good at. So you start doing them. But as you're describing, we see over and over people have this frustration where I like this, I'm good at it, and yet I'm not in that flow state. I'm not in that glide pattern. It's so much work for me, and yet I see my colleagues actually thriving. They gain energy from doing what takes energy from me. And a big chunk of that is this conative mismatch. So yes, for me as an 8, so we score this on a 1 through 10 scale, as an 8 in fact finder, somebody who needs detail and information, if I were in a job where I was not allowed to do that, where I could only describe things in general terms, I can. And frankly, as you were describing, in working with clients, sometimes you tell yourself going into it, here's the executive summary. That's all I'm going to talk to them about. And that's fine. I can do that. But if that was my day after day after day, I need to be out of that position. We also see that a lot in entrepreneurs in the life cycle of a company. They're great in that startup phase. And then when the company needs something else, they can, but they hate it. And they don't necessarily know when to get out or when to find the right person to take those tasks over so they can continue to thrive in doing what they do.
What do customers receive? Do they receive any evaluation or guidance after they receive the test?
One of the things that we've done as part of our mission, we want this to be very approachable. So the result itself gives lots of guidance, and it's not just a description of here are your strengths. It's also some tips for, okay, that's great, but how do I put this into practice in my life? So I think a good chunk of that is already in the results. But yeah, a lot of people want to go further. You mentioned Sandy Deems, who's one of our internal Kolbe certified people who can, essentially a coach. So you can shoot us an email at info@kolbe.com and just let us know that you're interested. We also train independent Kolbe certified consultants. There's a list of those people on our website. So if you want to meet in person with somebody near you, we have hundreds of them around the world. So yeah, there are those other opportunities. We also have additional material on the website. So sometimes they're audio-based things that are specifically about maybe coaching. We have the youth index for kids, and then that's also paired with a parent guide. So if you're the parent, it helps you understand, okay, great, these are my kids' strengths. That's what the Y index tells them. But as a parent, I want to know, how can I help them? We're huge believers in customizing, understanding individual people rather than giving one-size-fits-all advice. And the parent guide fits that model. We don't just say, here's the right way to parent children no matter what. We say, well, tell me about your kid's cognitive strengths, and then we'll give you some suggestions about what that kid needs to be successful. So there are lots of other materials like that on our website.
Where can people sign up for the Kolbe Index test, and how much does it cost?
It's really easy. It's at kolbe.com. That's KOLBE.com. And it's easy to find once you're there. For adults, you take what we call the Kolbe A Index. It costs $49.95. And it's really easy. You just go on, you answer 36 questions, you pay, and you get the results immediately. You don't have to wait for somebody to interpret them for you.
For the people who are watching this, you also do offer the test in German, which is great. A lot of my audience is German speaking.
We do, and we're actually working on a slightly updated version, so it'll be a little more current soon.
David, thank you so much for sharing all these great informations, and it was wonderful to have you on.
Thanks. I love being here. Thanks, Renee.
Okay. Bye-bye, David.
Bye.
By the way, my number is 8841, and I'm curious, what is yours? If you still have questions in regards to Kolbe, hit me up via email or use the comments below. See you guys soon. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.